Welcome to the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast. I am the curator, Garrett Chaffin-Quiray. Today we have a conversation with a friend, Ed Rosa.
That's me. Hi. My filmmaking partner and I have a YouTube channel, Toothless Richard Productions, where you can see a number of our short films.
This podcast is called Blockbusters and Birdwalks, and that second word, birdwalks, is named for the fact that birds often trace in irregular pattern trying to find the food they want to eat rather than like a predator would go right to it. This being a metaphor for how I like to think about movies, and you're taking the exploration with me, means that sometimes we look at popular movies, sometimes we look at memorable movies, sometimes we look at trash. Sometimes we just look at weird things that are off the path towards the blockbuster. I think this movie, She Done Him Wrong, is a great illustration of that. As a birdwalk away from what would be more widely recognized as the great hit of 1933. This sits to the side of that, but is something that's worth exploring. This is a period piece. It was the retelling of a stage play called Diamond Lil from 1928, which was thinking about 1880s New York, which is recreated on the Paramount backlot. The big reason to watch this movie is Mae West's central performance, taking on the play that she wrote, re-inhabiting that role, and doing so before the censorship practices of Hollywood really clamped down. This is a pre-code movie. Those things are on my mind. What's your background experience with She Done Him Wrong?
This might be a bit of a circuitous way to get to this. I've been a fan of Looney Tunes for my entire life, and I've only grown to appreciate them, the Warner Brothers shorts, more and more the older I get. They were chock-a-block with these pop cultural references of the time. So growing up, like watching these cartoons, you don't realize it, especially as a kid, but you're sort of being plied with all kinds of musical references and cinematic references and stuff that will get burned into your brain, but you don't really know where it's from or if it's from anything.
That jives with part of my life experience.
Yeah, and even classical music, because there's so many classical pieces used. Like when I got to to an age where I had the autonomy to be able to seek stuff out, when I think the very first time I saw Cagney was I rented Angels with Dirty Faces, right? And there was so many like little things from the Looney Tunes in there. I was like, wow, wow, I know all this stuff. I've heard this. This is where it comes from.
Right.
The song Frankie and Johnny is featured in a lot of them. Carl Stalling used that song as like a leitmotif in like a ton of them. So when I found out that song was sort of the musical centerpiece of this film, summarily became smitten with Mae West.
Frankie went round the corner to get a bucket of beer. So to the man called the bartender, have you seen my Johnny here? He is my man, and he's doing me wrong.
Preparing for our conversation, a couple of little things locked into my head, and one is that she's extraordinarily comparable to modern figures like, to me, and Amy Schumer, the way that they're deliberately taking women's sexuality and unusual women's bodies that don't conform to little teeny whispery pencil-thin chicks.
Right.
But full-bodied women who are proud of their curve are willing to use it to curry favor and enjoy using their bodies for personal pleasure and talking about it. It's not something they conceal. That's very much Mae West's whole gig.
Yeah.
And knowing that she's transgressing the social norms, she is the one woman that everybody moves out of the way for. But she's approaching the age of 40 when she makes this movie. She's by no means young, and that's contrasted with one of the secondary characters who's literally a girl. I don't think she's even 17 years old when cast in this movie.
Right.
Playing a runaway, more or less, who's sold into prostitution by the background piece of this movie story, which is ultimately kind of unimportant. I mean to say, that conventional type, that young girl/woman, is what Mae West compares against, and yet everybody in this movie bends the knee to worship at her feet because she's so extraordinarily powerful with that curve, with that willingness to talk, with the double entendre, all the stuff that she does.
Most people that would have seen this at the time, I'm sure all men would have just loved it. I gotta believe women would have seen Mae West. How cool is she? I wish it could be this cool, like this confident.
Well, again, to put that frame around it being set in the 1880s, and the premise of the movie is that we're centered on this woman named Lady Lou, that's Mae West. She's an entertainer at a nightclub, which seems to be a front for a criminal undertaking, where the guy who owns this front is running drugs, he's running commodities of various sorts, he's running people and runs a prostitution ring.
Prostitutes, counterfeit.
And he's sending some of that to other cities, so it's crossing state lines, which becomes a federal issue. Into the midst of this situation, there is a guy next door, literally next door, who's running a mission to help the poor, but he's actually an undercover federal agent. Isn't it nice he's played by a very young Cary Grant?
Yeah. I think this is his first... I don't know if this is his first appearance in film, but it's his first major role.
I think that's correct. He had been in some other things, I believe, a couple of years before, but here he is, Cary Grant.
Right.
His teeth aren't yet capped. He still looks like the Englishman that he was and remained for much of his career, but he's tall and he's strapping and handsome.
And he's got that great voice.
And he does have the great voice. And Lady Lou, of course, digs him, but she's got her own problems because a former lover of hers is upstate, presumably at Sing Sing, for having done bad things. And he's got his hooks in her and feels that she is his. The guy who runs this edifice where she sings each day as an entertainer has his hooks inside of her. And she's nonetheless trying to be a relatively benevolent figure to help everybody do okay on the up and up because she's not involved in the criminal enterprise but knows that it's happening around her. She instead benefits because men give her diamonds.
Right.
They give her gold. She's become fantastically wealthy with the jewels that she wears on her person. And she has a body servant played by Louise Beavers, Pearl. That's kind of exciting, a black actress. All of which is to say, in the end, she manages to create a situation where the Fed is able to snatch up the bad guys. She feels she's going to the penitentiary herself, but no, in fact, he loves her too, takes her in his carriage, proposes marriage, and she's latched into becoming a proper woman, a wife.
Well, he doesn't even really, he doesn't even ask.
He just puts the ring on like handcuffs.
Well, and, the implication almost seems to be like it's marry me or jail.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's not even implied because the other folks are getting in a paddy wagon. She notably does not believes that's where she's headed, so he said puts the ring on. The end. What's weird about this movie is it's super abrupt and very short. It's just over an hour's length, and when we get to the peak of the second act, which is when this whole enterprise seems to collapse because the Fed snaps his trap, it's over with.
Yeah.
And he's given her this ring, or actually forced it upon her, and we just go to the very brief credits, and it's done.
Yeah.
So I think a modern audience would be quite unprepared for how abrupt that is, but I think that's consistent with a lot of movies from this time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. I think a lot of modern audiences would probably be upset at the way this thing ends.
Yeah.
But I think they would enjoy the majority of it right up until the very end.
55 minutes of its action would be just fine. In the last 10 minutes, like, what is she finally kowtowing to this fool?
Well,
if he is Cary Grant.
Right, well, because especially, we've spent enough time with her to really kind of, know her. And the idea that she could be satisfied in a marriage, particularly to someone as overly scrupulous as the Hawk, Cary Grant, it's like, I'll buy that for a month or two. I don't know how long this thing's going to last, especially because, as we've seen, she's a very magnetic personality. Dudes aren't going to stop pushing up.
I always did like a man in a uniform. That one fits you grand. Why don't you come up sometime, see me? I'm home every evening.
People have always kind of been the way they are. And, so we have this idea, when we look back...
people are more chaste or something.
Right, but I don't think that's true.
Right.
I just think that it was it was more, offensive to talk about it than it was to actually do it.
But here is a signal from popular art saying, we don't have to worry about any of that.
Right.
Because there's no real penalty that she faces for her behaviors. And I think that's probably what upsets so many people who would consider themselves the guardians of social values.
Yeah.
She's not punished for being what amounts to a loose woman who enjoys drink, enjoys smoke, entertains at night, largely men, and encourages their identification with her sexuality as a way to earn money, and not just a little bit, but quite a lot.
Right.
She has so much money that she buys the mission next door to save it.
Right.
From being closed and turned into something else because she has a soft heart.
Right.
But she's wealthy. And she's amassed that wealth clearly before old age, and it's all in the back of her entertainment value, which is gaudy display, big curves, and these little liners that she drops on people. Nobody else in the movie has all of that magnetism,
right.
And that makes her extraordinary, and that makes her threatening.
Yeah.
Because what if other women who are watching this, especially the young, look up and say, well, maybe I could behave like that.
Maybe I can use my innate abilities and charms to manipulate men.
Watch club sometime, huh?
As I know it was a stage play, that she was the central performer in that stage play, and so it's very restricted to what the proscenium can allow us and what limited numbers of sets that it will provide.
Right.
The movie has a similar feel of restriction, some stuff that's probably from other productions on the back lot, but basically it's one main set. You can see this very easily being shot with a stationary camera. Fortunately, they move that camera around.
Yeah.
They give it some energy by having the camera pan and move. Not really on a dolly so much. I didn't see that. It was all still camera that just pivots one way or the other, cants, tilts, these kinds of things. But there's a pretty energetic editorial strategy where we get lots of cuts, which is better than seeing it on a stage because the musical numbers are fine. It's a really limited story with not too many plot points and not many sets. It's not that exciting.
Yeah.
But when we can really push in for a close-up of her gown and see how bejeweled she is, wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
We can see why she's such an icon of a certain sort of fashion, especially for a woman of her time.
The earlier you go, at least in the sound era, the camera is less likely to move, and you're getting a couple of musical numbers as well as the main story.
Well, and there's an accidental killing. She's holding a knife and a woman runs into it and stabs herself and dies.
Russian Rita.
Yeah. So there are these. It's a lot like, I suppose, a variety show, a magazine of TV productions, which we're used to because we're TV people. This movie is trotting that out. We have romance. We have the criminal underworld, because we go to Sing Sing. That's a set I forgot to mention.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We do have the prison.
There's the sexy stuff about flirtation. There's the kissy face stuff. There's murder. There's threat. Then there's a showpiece.
Yeah.
There's some comic stuff around the edges because, of course, this happens in a bar, and some of the patrons are terribly drunk. In fact, there's a guy crying in his beer.
Like literally,
about that.
And should not in your beer.
These are terrific little notes, and they happen quickly, and fortunately, the movie has enough good sense to not stretch it. It doesn't have 2 hours of material.
Right. She single-handedly saved Paramount Pictures from going out of business with this thing.
Is that right?
Yeah, because Paramount, from what I understand, was like on the brink of closing up their doors. They knew, whoever was running Paramount at the time knew this thing was going to be controversial. Do it. As Eric Bischoff famously said, controversy creates cash.
Yeah.
Anticipating blowback from, I guess the moral majority, I suppose.
Of that era, right.
Right. And sure enough, because it did gangbusters business.
And there's a point, because, I started out by saying this is the Blockbusters and Birdwalks podcast, and part of what that's tied into is my weird attachment to earnings. I really like these things. And so what I discovered is that this movie, for its time, was budgeted at around $275,000, which in today's money is not quite $7 million. And it earned against that something like $2 million. We didn't have a modern-style blockbuster where something would earn $100 million in a single territory, which is how we now define it. If we do inflation and adjustment, this movie was probably close to making $50 million. And that put it near the top of its year's prospects. But if you spend 7 and you make 50, you're going to save a lot of people's bank.
Right.
And maybe write the studio so it has 6 more months to live to come out with the next thing, which could have been another Mae West vehicle, or it could have been another Cary Grant vehicle, because these performers would be in 4, 5, or 8 movies in a year easily because of the way the studio system was organized. I guess my general point is to say, while the most popular movies of our time can always be documented against certain kinds of records historians rely on and that journalists turn to, the way that single-hit blockbusters run the world of today's movies is not how they were run in days of yore.
Right.
The same pots of gold were not thrown forward to make movies, and they weren't expected to earn as much. But if you make 7-fold your investment, you've done really well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's what this movie seems to have accomplished, earning that kind of money. And then, of course, this movie is, in later years, it became one of the early registered National Film Preservation Board titles that we're preserving for our children's children in the Library of Congress, because of its value as a pre-code movie that really illustrates what that era was about. So could you sort of express what you think the pre-code era's thing is? I know you've had attachment to this, having sponsored a film festival and so on.
Filmmakers had a freedom that they wouldn't really have again until the late 60s and the early 70s because of the Hays Code. You know, if you watch films from like the early talkies, you can see the art form figuring out how to properly incorporate sound into something that was just purely a visual medium previously. But I think by the time we get to 1931, they figured it out.
Yeah.
And now this thing is firing on all cylinders. And there just seems to be so much sort of creative freedom, as well as all kinds of just crazy bonkers ideas before the puritanical side of things would clamp down on it. Well, it's I'm a fugitive from a chain gang. I mean, it's really, really good. Whereas something like Call Her Savage, I wouldn't say is really good in the same way, but it's completely off the wall. And
that's the one where a woman she's on an island with a bunch of men.
No, that's Safe in Hell.
Right, I'm getting them mixed up. Another pre-code, yeah.
Yeah, Call Her Savage is the one with Clara Bow. I think it was her last
final
film.
movie, yeah.
Call Her Savage because she's half American Indian.
Okay.
And so there's this racial thing that's an issue, and she kind of goes off the rails. Footlight Parade of the Busby Berkeley films, it's kind of my favorite one, also because it's an early Cagney film where he's kind of a song and dance man, but it's just creatively exuberant in a way that sort of typifies, I feel like, films kind of this time, like 1930 to 1934.
Well, I know to broaden the scope of it all, one of the things that we can pinpoint about this moment, and 34 is when the code, it's been present through the whole 1930s, but it becomes fully enforced in 34.
Right.
So we're a year and a half before that when this movie comes out in January. The point is that certain of the codified American genres that we reflect on really sort of find their big boy pants. Mm-hmm. The gangster movie really gets its own right there. Like I'm thinking of Scarface, which I think we've watched together.
Yeah.
Which is surprisingly violent.
Yeah, well, and oddly sexual, too.
Yeah,
because
there's this incestuous sensual relationship.
Which is really, I mean, they don't come right out and say it, but they don't need to.
Because it's pretty plain.
Yeah.
There's some hanky going on between this brother and sister.
Yeah.
And Tarzan the Ape Man drops in the middle of this era where, notably, there is semi-nude swimming and not lovemaking, but seduction.
Right.
This moment is, at once, more true to life and at once far more artificial. What do I mean? Well, true to life. If people are violent, they're going to hurt each other. If people are angry, they're going to yell profanity. If people are hot and bothered, they're going to kiss and smooch and touch in ways which maybe the kids shouldn't see.
Right.
But artificial, all of that's being done inside of studio spaces. So all of the surfaces, they're not true. For example, in this movie, you can sort of see the pancake makeup on these performers. You can see that when they're indoors, there's depth, but you can rest assured that on the other side of the cabinet, that is the bar, there's just some 2x4s propping up nothing.
Right.
And so you have the impression that this is not a real place. Mm-hmm. It's meant to approximate a real place, but parked right up in the middle of it are going to be these interesting characters, one of whom, Mae West, is a fully enfranchised woman, which is a disagreeable thing to some people in the culture.
Well, and another one of sort of the what I consider the hallmarks of sort of the pre-code era is that feminine sexuality, women's sexuality, is sort of dealt with in a way more honest and realistic way, and would feature more prominently the story of Temple Drake in particular, which was, I think it was pretty controversial because it deals with this woman who, gets raped, and then it's so sort of, I don't want to say brazen, but it just is so frank. Women are as multi-dimensional as men are, and these movies back then, or at least in the pre-code era, were sort of more willing to explore that kind of stuff.
And I mentioned at the top of our conversation that there's this one non-white character, Louise Beavers, playing Pearl, who's a body servant to Lou, and that on its face would also be an affront to the predominant system that Hollywood typified by the 1930s,
right,
which is a white-dominated institution. In fact, there's a lot of brown-face stuff goes on, a lot of bronze-face stuff goes on, a lot of black-face stuff goes on. Very famously, with even the first sound movie, or the first so-called sound movie, The Jazz Singer.
Yeah.
These notions of racial stratification are also built into all of this sort of superstructure of Hollywood ideas, because the escape is aimed and targeted at a very specific kind of an audience. Not everybody, and that cuts out a certain number of viewers. In fact, at this very same time, the 1930s, movies were being made by brown-skinned people and black-skinned people and bronze-skinned people, but they were not being shown in the main movie palaces owned by these large studios, which also is a signal of where we are in the 1930s. The established old studios like Paramount were able to make movies, distribute movies, and show movies all within their own facilities, fully owned, and it was all illegal. Antitrust legislation, just like the code itself, had not yet been really stuck down, even though the law said you can't do it.
Right.
And that meant that you can codify the rules and churn something in a factory like Assembly week after week after week, month after month, year after year, and earn a tidy bundle. Which, of course, by the late 30s, after the Depression is gotten over, many of these studios had righted their ship just in time for World War II.
Right.
So one additional note for why I think this movie is prominent and interesting. It comes out in 33. What we're starting to see in 33 is we've bottomed from the Great Depression, but we haven't really come up out of it. And this movie's response to that is a sexually imbued woman who can sing and dance, and she's a clothes horse. And she's got these one-liners.
Come up, I'll tell you a fortune. You can be had.
She's ironic.
Yeah.
She's always, in a way, without looking directly at us, she's winking at us the whole way through. She's very aware that she is a construct and that we know she's a construct, so she knows that we know that she knows that she's a construct.
Right.
And that weird mirroring is terrific. And not everybody can do it.
Well, and this movie is slightly meta in that way, in that it's not a documentary, but certainly this is Mae West being, Mae West, how I'm sure maybe there was a moment when, she's at home at the end of the day where she's off. But we're watching a movie where she's playing Lou, but she's really playing herself.
Yeah. She doesn't really live outside of the character she plays for other people to watch.
Right.
What fun.
And it's a bit of a nice fantasy for the audience, too, to be able to sort of put themselves in her shoes and be like, man, wouldn't it be so great? The person I like next door can't pay the rent anymore. Here's a necklace.
Yeah, I'll buy the
building.
Yeah,
here you go. There's an unlimited supply of cash.
Right.
Basically.
And I can leverage all of it at will and just make everything happen.
Right.
And all I got to do is sing a couple songs a night.
Right. And you could go out and drink legally.
Yeah.
Which you couldn't do. Prohibition gets repealed sometime in 33, I think, because I know FDR, one of his campaign promises that he
would
got
roll
elected,
it back.
that he'd get rid of it. But, when you said it, because in 1932, when they must have shot it, obviously Prohibition is still in effect, so people like to drink, but, they have to feel shame or guilt or worry about getting busted, or they're drinking bathtub gin, or toilet wine, because they can't get real stuff. But here in the gay 90s, the beer is flowing freely, and, big schooners, and, there's no shame.
Yeah, and everybody can enjoy all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's also a celebration of federal authority, because in the end, of course, the Hawk, Captain Cummings, the Cary Grant character, he's a force of nothing but benevolent good.
Yeah.
Let's turn out these criminal underlords who are literally selling our daughters into prostitution rings in foreign cities, or in domestic cities, like San Francisco shows up in their conversation.
Right.
And what a great thing that would be, right in the moment when J. Edgar Hoover is rising to his powers, where he would be for the next 30, 35 years. All of that's coming to a head in the 1930s, which is against, the close textual reading of what the movie is. Its angles, its shots, its editing choices.
Yeah.
But it's impossible, I think, to see a movie this age, from this remove, almost 90 years, and not think about, well, what is it trying to establish and suggest, as well as overtly what's the story about. I find for myself a movie like this, a relic from a former time, is richest when I can see it on both those levels. Here's the story, here's what happens, here are the people, this is what they wear.
Right.
But then what does it mean, and why is that happening right then?
Right.
And maybe that's the signature treat of this pre-code moment. So just to tie off that piece of the conversation, this movie, like other movies of its time, could be in theaters for more than a year before it went through all of the different rotations of release. And because of that, a lot of movies from this era are very fragile even today, and some of them have not been preserved, but there were a number of movies that were in competition with this one for top dollar, including the likes of King Kong. I was happy to realize that Gabriel Over the White House was in theaters at the same time as this movie. And Gabriel Over the White House is one of those unusual experiments when the movie wears on its sleeve an ideological distinction from the American mainstream, because it is about a man with a head injury who decides he's going to run for the presidency of the United States as a socialist.
Or no, he is president already.
Oh, and he gets hurt.
And
That's
and he's basically corrupt. But then when he gets hit on the head, he becomes, all of a sudden...
a complete socialist republic. Yeah, like
right.
He leads the nation in an entirely Bernie Sanders-esque direction.
Right.
But is a wonderful success. And so the capitalist powers that be, they basically want to assassinate the guy.
Yeah.
And spend the movie trying to get him out of office. That's clearly against the interests of what we consider proper Americana. But that's exactly what this pre-code moment is about. Interesting experiments from mainline studios who were willing to and able to be rewarded by profiting on material that drifted away from just saccharine stuff everybody's seen many times before.
Frankie and Johnny were sweethearts. Oh, how they could love. Swore they'd be true to each other. True as the stars up above, he was a man. And he was doing all wrong.
This is Blockbusters and Birdwalks, a conversation between Garrett Chaffin-Quiray and
Ed Rosa.
Boop boopity doo.